Jesus is playing. He's a child and he's playing. And then the story says that there is this other child that's there. And this other child was often tortured by Satan. Satan would often enter into him, even as a child. And this child had a habit whenever Satan would enter into him, is that he wanted to bite other children. Isn't that interesting? You know? So here there's this normal behavior that we find in children where they want to bite, right? Other kids, not all children are like that, but some children are like that. And in this particular infancy gospel, the reasoning behind this child wanting to bite is that he's possessed by the devil or he's possessed by Satan. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الأئمة والمهديين وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear daughter and companion, Emaan.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's my honor.
The honor is all mine. God bless you.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, and it's a really important one, actually. It's an age-old mystery, and it is this idea of whether or not we actually have free will in this world. Because there are this group of narrations that make it very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, and that everybody has the ability to choose in life between the right path and the wrong path, between good and evil, between God and belief or disbelief. But yet at the same time, we have these narrations that indicate the opposite of that and seem to paint the picture that we are condemned or limited, so to speak, in our choices, all right, whether or not to be a believer or non-believer. It seems to be something that is predestined, all right, something which is ordained and written from beforehand. And you have narrations for that reason that come up that, you know, that state basically that the Shia or their names or the believers, that their names were written in the books in the heavens from way before, and that Imam Ali alayhi salam knows the names of his Shia, and there would be narrations where he would meet a man and the man would be claiming to be a believer in him, and he would say, no, I never saw your name written. So it kind of indicates that, okay, even if this man is a believer today, it doesn't matter, because to be a true believer, it's something that had to have been ordained from the beginning of time. There's also the same thing occurring in the book of Revelation when it's speaking about those people that appear with the Lamb in the end times, that those are righteous individuals, that are believers, that their names were written and chosen from the very beginning of time, before even creation. And so you have this problem occurring, this question being posed. Okay, so which one is it? Is it a thing where I have the ability to choose, or do I not? And when you take that and you search even further, you find that the question itself is posed really in the Quran. And it's posed in the Quran in Surah Al-Kahf, and it's posed in Surah Al-Kahf in the story of the righteous servant with Moses, and in particular in the incident where he's walking with Moses and they stumble upon a little boy. And this is a very problematic scene for a lot of people. And it was very problematic for Moses, because he hears this young boy, he has not even reached to the age of being judged or held accountable for his actions. He's just a child. He commits no sin at all. His slate is clean. There's nothing that he had ever done before that was bad or that would justify that the righteous servant kill him, right? The only people that God allows that we kill in his laws, right, are the people that are guilty of some sort of horrible crime, and then capital punishment is justifiable. And that's what Moses was objecting to this idea that the righteous servant took this innocent child who was not guilty of any sort of crime, and he punishes him. And later in the story, we find out that he was killed because of crimes not that he had committed in the past, but crimes that he would commit in the future. And so this idea verifies the concept that the child was already condemned towards a certain destiny, that the righteous servant was able to look on him, and perhaps based on the way that he looked, or perhaps the righteous servant was able to see in the future, or perhaps there was some sort of indication from the behavior of the child whereby the righteous servant recognized that this one is one of those whose names are not written in the book of life. This is one of the bad ones, and therefore it was justifiable to carry out capital punishment on this child, not due to something that he did in the past, but due to actions that would take place in the future. We find the same thing occurring in a group of gospels that existed, that were left out of the current Bible as we know it, but they are upheld and referred to in the Holy Quran. And I'm speaking specifically about the infancy Gospels of Jesus Christ. And so we have the story of Jesus. We have little bits and pieces of information about his birth. We have a giant focus in the Gospels that are in the current Bible, that focus on the 3 years, especially of the dawah of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, from the time that he was baptized until the time of his crucifixion. But we're lacking a lot of information on where was Jesus in the lost years, right? Between the time that he was born, or let's say the time that his parents took him to Egypt, all the way to the beginning of his ministry. Those are the mystery years. And so in the very beginning of the church, and in the very beginning, the first days or years or decades, the first couple hundred years, especially after the passing of Jesus Christ or the events of the crucifixion, you have these gospels that had appeared that sought to fill in the answers for what happened, and they preserved a series of stories concerning Jesus Christ during his childhood. In these gospels, or one of those gospels, there is a story where it speaks of a miracle that Jesus made, where he took some clay and he formed them into the shape of birds, and he breathed life into them. And this particular miracle is referred to in the Quran, right? Where it says, and he creates birds by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we find that the Quran is drawing upon this story, or referring to this story that's in the infancy gospel. And therefore the Quran is verifying, Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam are verifying that this is true, this is correct, even though it was left out of the modern day gospel, or the church, Roman church approved New Testament or gospel that we have, it is still correct and it is still accurate. So you have a lot of the times the Quran referring to texts that are outside of the mainstream ones and referring to stories in them. And by these references, we know that these gospels contain in them truth, or they are all truth, right? So we have to look into these gospels. Now, what happens is that when we go and we look into the infancy gospels to see what other stories are there besides this story of the miracle, where Jesus creates these birds, we find that there are these interactions that Jesus has with other children. And this is really what I want to focus on. These interactions that Jesus has with these other children. There is one particular interaction where Jesus comes across a group of people that are upset, and they're carrying this child and they're crying. And the child appears to be unconscious or appears to be really, really sick. And so basically Jesus finds out that what happened is that this boy had went with some of the other boys that were his age. And this boy went forward and he places his hand inside of a nest that belonged to a bird in order to grab some of the eggs of the bird. And lo and behold, a snake came out and bit him and put its poison inside of the boy. Jesus performs a miracle in front of the parents and in front of the people. He accompanies the people as they go forward to the nest where the boy was bitten, in order that they may kill the snake so nobody else can be harmed. Before they kill the snake, Jesus commands the snake to come out, and he tells the snake that it has to go forward and suck back out all of the poison that it placed in the boy. And the snake obeys him, and he goes forward and he sucks all the poison out. And then Jesus curses the snake, and the snake explodes and dies. Then at the very end of the story, it says perhaps the most important line in it. And it says, and that boy that was cured from the snake bite, he ends up growing up and becoming one of the disciples of Jesus. And his name is Simon the Canaanite, right? So that's interesting, and it makes us stop. And that same theme repeats itself over and over and over again. So here's a boy who has a positive interaction, him and his family, with Jesus Christ, okay? And later on, when he grows up, he also has a positive interaction with Jesus Christ, and he becomes one of his disciples.
Yes.
The story repeats itself again in the gospel. There's another child who's bitten by a snake, although the circumstances are different. It's not about a bird's nest and all of that. And Jesus goes forward and he cures the boy. And then in the very end of the story, it says, and that boy ended up, he was basically James the Lesser, right? So there you have, again, one of the disciples who's now a child, who's with baby Jesus or child Jesus, and they are having a positive interaction with each other. And Jesus cures him. He believes Jesus cures him. And later on, he ends up becoming a disciple of Jesus. And so this puts a whole different spin now on the New Testament Gospels, because here we have now Jesus and his disciples, but actually his disciples are not new strangers that he just met during adulthood that followed him. Rather, they were childhood friends that ended up holding on to him. And there's this theme too of the reoccurrence, the stability of their nature. They were good with him in childhood, at peace with him. They loved him. And in adulthood, also, they were at peace with him, and their hearts remained the same. Their bodies changed. Their souls and their hearts remained the same. When we look even further, we find a third story where there's this woman who had two children. And one of them became extremely sick, had the fever, ended up passing away, and the woman was heartbroken about it. And then her second child ends up having a fever, and she's worried that basically he's going to die too. And he's become extremely, extremely sick. And so she's going forward. She sees Mary. Mary has this reputation of having this miraculous baby that she travels with through the different towns. And everywhere that Mary goes with the baby seems to be able to heal, the people just by touching it or glancing upon it. So she tells Mary her dilemma. She says, my child's about to die. And Mary tells her, go ahead and wrap your child up and place him inside of the basket right next to Jesus. If he shares the basket with Jesus and shares the covering with him and has this physical touching, right? Physical interaction with my son, he will be cured. And so she does exactly that. She places him inside the basket, and lo and behold, he's cured. And at the end of the story, the most important line is written, and that is, and that child grew up to become Bartholomew, the disciple of Jesus Christ. And so here we have once again, and yet another child who was cured and has a positive interaction with Jesus, not as a child, but as an infant, actually, because he's in the cradle and he's placed next to him. And then in the end, they end up growing up and he's good. In another place, in the exact same gospel, it is said that Jesus is out and he's playing with James and John. Yet two more of the children that end up growing up and becoming Jesus's disciples later on. And so you have now Bartholomew, you have James the Lesser, you have James and John, and you have who else?
Simon the Canaanite.
Simon the Canaanite. All of these individuals, 5 of the disciples out of the 12 are interacting with Jesus at youth, and their hearts, are at peace with him. There's love between them, and their hearts remain stable, and their behavior remains stable later on in life. And that's a really important concept because it raises the question of, well, what's happening here? Did they have free choice, or did they not have free choice? Was it a thing of being close to Jesus as he was a child that caused their hearts to behave in a certain way? Or is it just a thing where people who are good from the very beginning and they always remain good, and people that are bad and they always remain bad? And that takes us to the interaction in the infancy gospels with and this particular gospel that I'm referring to right now, it is the Arabic infancy gospel. So there's many of them, and one of them in particular was in Arabic, and I'm referring and drawing off of that particular one. In this gospel, there's an interaction with yet a 6th disciple. But this one is unlike the rest of them. What takes place is that Jesus is playing. He's a child and he's playing. And then the story says that there is this other child that's there. And this other child was often tortured by Satan. Satan would often enter into him, even as a child. And this child had a habit, whenever Satan would enter into him, is that he wanted to bite other children. Isn't that interesting? So here there's this normal behavior that we find in children where they want to bite, right? Other kids, not all children are like that, but some children are like that. And in this particular infancy gospel, the reasoning behind this child wanting to bite is that he's possessed by the devil, or he's possessed by Satan himself, actually. And so Jesus is next to him one day, and this child is trying to play with Jesus. and he attempts to bite Jesus during one of his episodes where he's possessed by the devil. Luckily for Jesus, he's unable to bite him. God protects him, but he still manages to strike Jesus to the point that it caused Jesus a great injury. It hurt him. And the gospel says that Jesus even began to cry. He struck him in his side. And then the story says that he struck him in the exact same place that later on he would be stabbed by the spear of the Roman soldier at the scene of the crucifixion. And then it said, and the child who was possessed by Satan, his name was Judas, and he ended up being Judas Iscariot, who was one of the disciples of Jesus. Right? And in the very end, he betrays Jesus and leads basically causes the events to take place, which led to the stabbing of Jesus, or the lookalike, but it's that body of Jesus by the spear at the hands of the Roman soldier. And then it says, and Satan escaped out of Judas the baby in the form of a dog. So that's a real interesting,
really interesting.
Story. And it's a very important one, because now it actually shows something very clearly. And that is that those disciples that were good with Jesus and that ended up dying upon faith and ended up having, basically being martyred later on, spreading the dawah or the religion or the call of Jesus Christ. They were always good. They were good while they were with Jesus. They were good before Jesus was declared to be a proof of God or the Son of God or a representative or a caliph of God. And they were good also during childhood. They didn't attack Jesus. They didn't bite Jesus. They weren't scratching Jesus. And they were actually cured and healed by Jesus and believed in Jesus. And yet Judas, who was bad as a child and possessed by Satan as a child, he continuously was possessed by Satan. Satan entered into Judas as he was a child to bite Jesus, and Satan enters into Judas in the New Testament later on when Judas rises up and goes forward to betray Jesus, all right? So the same thing, his nature remains one from childhood all the way through adulthood. So that's an interesting fact, and it further confirms. So the Quran confirms the infancy Gospels, and the infancy Gospels confirm another part of the Quran, which is this. It justifies the actions of the righteous servant. Because it poses the question, if you were the righteous servant and you came across a child like Judas and you knew that this child was possessed by the devil, even though his only crime was perhaps scratching or biting or striking other children, would you be justified in, if you had that knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to take the life of the child?
Yes.
The Quran says, yes, you are justified. And that was the big lesson that Moses learned. The infancy Gospels is saying that that concept is correct.
Yes, of course.
And that brings us then to these narrations that we have from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad alayhi salam that further explain this notion or this concept. And they essentially state that in the very beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this earth. He created a beautiful earth, or beautiful parts of the earth. And the beautiful parts of the earth that smelt good, that tasted good, the fruits that came out of it tasted good. These were parts of the earth that pure water flowed on the top of it. And the water and the earth were given the opportunity to believe in God and believe in the Prophet Muhammad and believe in the wilayah of Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, the Imams and the Mahdis. And it chose to believe. The grass believed, the trees believed, the soil believed, and the water believed that was flowing on its top. Then God addressed a different part of the earth, and it was a filthy part. It was dirty, it was nasty, it was dark. It had rotten waters that were flowing on the top of it. And it asked that soil and those waters if they accepted or believed in the wilayah of God and Muhammad and the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. But it declined to, it refused to. And then Al-Hadith Sharif and the narrations and the Imams, peace be upon them, led by Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and Al-Hadith Sharif, when he's speaking to Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar, he basically explains that this is the reasoning behind the idea that we have certain tastes. We have things that taste sweet, and we have things that taste really bad and sour.
Yeah.
We have things that smell good, and we have things that smell bad. We have things that look good, and we have things that look bad because of these two clays or two parts of the earth that were originally created. Part of it had the free choice to accept God and chose to. Part of it had the free choice to accept God and it declined to. And so all non-believers are created in essence, the narration state, from that clay. We all come from the earth, right? Our material that forms our body, it comes from this planet. And so everything that we were made of, we were created from, the non-believers created from the earth that was smelly, that was stinky, that was ugly, that refused to accept the wilayah of Allah and His Messenger. And all the believers who succeed in this life, they succeed not because they were good at childhood, they succeed because they were in the origin of their state, the very material that their body was made of before their soul even entered into it, was made from this clay that was believing clay, righteous clay, good clay. And the narrations, by the way, they do state that an individual, wherever he dies, the spot in which the individual dies, he dies precisely above the clay that he was made from. So if a person dies in the UK, he died because that spot where he was standing on, he was created from that. The person who dies in India, he was created from that clay that was from India in that particular spot. So there's no country, there's no, and I want to clarify that in case people wonder, there's no country, there's no like entire area like that all of it in its entirety is evil or good, because these borders that were drawn, these are man-made borders. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't draw them. But in every country, there are spots on it that are pure, and there are spots or locations on it that are evil. There's places on it that was made from the good clay and places on it that was made from the bad clay. And so in short, in summary, in closing, what we have now is we have this question that's posed, and it's really essentially like, do I have free will, or am I already condemned to become good or evil? And the answer is given to us by the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, and it essentially is that if you are a disbeliever, it's because you are in essence, you have always been a disbeliever. You've been a disbeliever as a child. You've been a disbeliever before you were even made or created or born. And you, even though you were made from this evil clay, let's say this evil clay projected itself out into varying creations. The evil clay always has the opportunity to be close to God. Hence, Judas, who was made from that evil clay and who was evil at childhood, Jesus and God gave Judas the opportunity to be as close as possible to the messenger. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even made Jesus appoint Judas as the responsible over the house of funds. He gave him every opportunity to be as close to him as possible. And yet, in the very end, people don't change, and whoever's an apple remains an apple. Whoever's an orange remains an orange. Whoever's a pear remains a pear. Free will is there and it's available, and people technically can change. But what we find is that most of the time people do not change. And it is the mixture of these clays throughout time, the marriages that took place between people that were created from the good clay and people that were created from the bad clay, that caused there to be an affliction that came upon the believers, whereby the person whose essence is from the good clay might have ugly or bad actions that come from them, and because they were mixed with other clay from the evil clay, the disbelieving clay. And that's why we find that there are disbelievers who sometimes do good things for mankind. They might not believe in God, or you might find the most wretched, evil of dictators and tyrants, but they still have certain policies, or they might do certain actions that have in it mercy. It's because of the good clay that mixed in a little bit with their evil clay. And Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that on the day of judgment, because God is just, he returns everything back to its origin. And so all of the good deeds that Judas Iscariot had committed throughout his life while he was with Jesus, those were not really his. Those were deeds that belonged to the other disciples because their clay had mixed together. So God will take that clay and return it back to its origin. And he will take the bad deeds that came out of the disciples, their weak moments, their doubt, their disbelief, and he will give that to Judas, because that is what Judas was made of, and that's his essence. And Judas becomes punished for his actions and for the actions of all of the other people that got mixed up with his clay, and vice versa. The believer is never punished because he didn't commit any sins. And it's a beautiful concept, because essentially it shows the justice of God. It shows that even though, we are in many ways ordained from the very beginning to be a believer or a non-believer, it's not because of the injustice of God. And we always have an opportunity to change and to choose if we want to, but it is the fact that human beings don't want to choose and change themselves. It's also beautiful because it shows that even though we make mistakes, those mistakes are not our fault. The mistakes that we make, it is the fault of the disbelieving ancestors that got mixed in our line, and everything in the end goes back to its origin.
Thank you. It's a very interesting topic. It is predetermined, but you still have the chance and the ability to choose the right thing or to choose the wrong thing. And then when you do that, it's all on you, and you can't blame anyone else, and you can't blame God. You had the chance. So
that's absolutely right. Well, God bless you, Emaan, and thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we love you very much.
Thank you. I love you too.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. So from this lesson with Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, we come to learn that it is a huge battle with the nafs, and it's a lifelong struggle between allowing the good clay to work and subduing the nature of the bad clay, until the end, when they separate and go back to where they belong. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing videos. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.